Good afternoon. On behalf of the board and staff at the Institute on Municipal Finance and Governance, I'm delighted to welcome you here today to the 11th Annual Toronto City Manager's Address. And the topic for today is a new deal for Toronto. What if they say yes? I'd love to say I thought of it, but I didn't. My name is Enid Slack, and I'm the director of IMFG at the School of Cities here at the University of Toronto. Before we begin, I wish to acknowledge the land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. I would like to thank IMFG's external funders, Havana Capital, Maitree, the Neptus Foundation, the City of Toronto, the region of Halton, the region of York, and the region of Durham. I'd also like to thank our team at IMFG, Cass Foreman and Piali Roy, and the team here at Monk, Nassim Hashim and Adam Bell, for making this all run smoothly today, because I know it's going to run very smoothly. If you are tweeting about this event, our hashtag is IMFG Talks, and our Twitter handle is at IMFG Toronto. For over a decade, the Toronto City Manager's Address has been really one of the flagship events here at IMFG. With one exception, last year, we have hosted the city manager for each of the past 10 years, starting with Joe Penichetti, Peter Wallace, and most recently, Chris Murray. And I would say 2 out of the 3 are here today. Joe P? No, Chris is here and Peter's here. I didn't want to single them out, but now we have. At this time last year, the permanent city manager had not yet been appointed. So we decided to hold a different kind of event, which turned out to be very successful, with the regional CAOs. And we like that event so much that we want to bring it back and make it part of the IMFG tradition. And some of the regional CAOs are here today as well. And so putting you on notice, we're going to try and have a regional CAOs event in the next couple of months. This year, though, we are excited to bring back the annual City Manager's Address and to welcome Paul Johnson, the City Manager of Toronto. Although much has changed at the political level in Toronto since the last address in the fall of 2021, the city's fundamental challenges have remained the same, or maybe even gotten a little worse. In its recent long-term financial plan, Toronto declared that it is in the state of financial crisis. There are many reasons for this. We're still suffering from the pandemic. Responsibilities have been downloaded to the municipalities. There's been increased pressure to fund regional services such as transit and shelters. And there are macroeconomic factors such as inflation and supply chain problems and other factors as well. But the mayor and the premier actually agree that Toronto cannot achieve financial sustainability alone. As a result, the city and the province are engaged in a New Deal working group that will prepare recommendations on financial sustainability and report by the end of November. And now we hear the feds want to join the party as well. So it's certainly timely to hear from the city manager today. So what I'd like now to do is introduce our moderator, who will introduce Paul Johnson to you. Our moderator this afternoon is Sabine Matheson. Sabine has been a principal of Strategy Corp since 1998 and is the founder of Strategy Corp's Municipal Affairs Practice Group. Sabine served as Chief of Staff to Ontario's Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, where I met her back in 1996 when I was on the Who Does What panel, so we go back a long way. Sabine serves as Strategy Corp's in-house counsel and previously practiced law in Toronto with a major Bay Street law firm. So, over to Sabine.
So, what a great pleasure to be here in such an august room of remarkable municipal people. I think I just want to acknowledge that where Enid's concerned, it's not just been a long time since '96, it's been a wonderful time. I once had the privilege of introducing her at an AMCTO conference where I said that she was the the Dame Judi Dench of municipal administration and municipal finance. And what they say of her is that she was a national treasure. Well, she's a municipal treasure, I think. So thank you very much, Enid, for all the work that you do illuminating this fabulous thing that is our municipal sector. And in a room that is so full of remarkable municipal leaders, it's particularly exciting to be able to introduce the newest to sort of have adopted or earned the title of city manager for the City of Toronto. Paul was plucked from the nonprofit world, where I think he was probably minding his own business and the business of important things in Hamilton. So we didn't necessarily follow the classic regular army approach to starting off, at the info desk in City Hall and working his way up. I interviewed the person who first brought him into municipal service, who said, I knew after talking to Paul for about 10 minutes that he was the sort of person I wanted on my team. And I had to interview Paul for a project, and it only took me about 10 minutes that I could see why. And of course, others have seen it too. In the context of his service in Hamilton, Paul and his co-leader of the pandemic response, they were both named Citizens of the Year in Hamilton, which is a great honor. And I'm not sure if that comes with what, like a tattoo or what, a Ticats tattoo, but I think the important point is his service translated so well from the not-for-profit sector to the municipal sector that he was recognized there for the immense social impact that he had. And now he's had a chance to bring it to our community. Now, different city managers bring different things to the role. And, some have acted like cheerleaders for their council or for their community, or others act like a team captain. Well, the thing about Paul is he's a ref. Now, people only say nice things about referees, I'm sure, which of course, well positions Paul for a position as Toronto City Manager. But as a basketball ref, don't even try to talk to him in March. I think if there are negotiations going on, they will not have to happen in March because, well, he'll be busy and we better not inquire as to why. But if you think about the attributes that a referee brings, trusted by opposing sides, that could come in handy at Toronto City Council. Ability to move fast, back and forth in multiple directions simultaneously, again, could come in handy. Ability to dodge elbows, yep. Also relevant. Get out of the way of the other players, definitely, but make their play possible, make them capable for that, create the conditions where they can thrive. And perhaps most of all, stand their ground in front of people who sometimes probably look a full 7 feet tall. Well, I think all of these attributes are alive and well in Paul, and I think you'll see why in his speech. And so if you'd all join me in welcoming Paul to the podium, we'll hear from Paul.
So today, a good friend of mine, we went to high school together in Hamilton, and we sometimes connect, and he said, what are you doing today? How's your day going? I said, well, my day's going great, because later this afternoon, I get to come and speak here at this great institution, and I hear it's a full house. And he said, what are the odds? I'm also in Toronto tonight. He's the replay official for the NBA at the Toronto Raptors game. And I hear it's going to be a full house as well. I said, do you want to switch? And, it's just one of those things where we texted back and forth and said, how blessed are we? We get to do things, and I get to do things as the city manager that I never imagined I would when I was a knucklehead at Sir Allan MacNab High School in Hamilton. And I think that's, the humility and the overwhelming sense of service that comes with city managers, is that you don't really think about, geez, this is where I'm going to end up, but somehow you get there. And tonight, I'm going to share some thoughts about what's happening here in Toronto. And I want to begin by speaking a little bit about the fact that none of us in our positions of leadership ever walk through that door and just have everything be because of us. It is always the culmination of work that has gone on and paths that have been taken. And when it comes to city managers, at least the ones that I've had the chance to connect with here in Toronto, talking to Joe Penichetti regularly, Peter Wallace and I have had the chance to talk on numerous occasions. And of course, Chris and I have a longer history, and we talk often too. You know, tonight you're going to hear a lot about how we're progressing, and I think progressing in a positive way towards a discussion about a new relationship with other orders of government. Not to solve a problem that Toronto just is too lazy to solve for itself, but to solve a problem that will be a blueprint for how I believe cities need to be treated and need to be in relationship with other orders of government long-term if we're going to have the type of province and country that we want. But this is not work that, again, started when I meandered through the door to the city manager's office a year ago. Joe and I talked about the tremendous leadership that Toronto showed in some of his time of doing things like pushing and prodding on upload. Remember Ontario Works? Cost shared by municipalities, 80-20, on the investments made for individuals and families. Can you imagine how a property tax base over time can sustain those types of investments? Uploaded now. The only cost sharing is on the cost of administration. Peter Wallace and I talked about the work that he did to raise and elevate the conversation about the challenge that Toronto was facing and put in very stark terms that things needed to start to change, things needed to start to move in different directions, both internally at the City of Toronto as well as externally with other orders of government. Chris led Toronto through one of the most incredible periods in our history, and I don't say that in a very positive way because leading a city of this size through a pandemic is no easy task, and we owe Chris and the team a debt of gratitude for that work. I came in at the tail end of it, but in no way was there during the crisis moments. But in the midst of that work and in the midst of bringing Toronto through that incredibly difficult period, Chris worked with the left of center, the right of center on council, and said it's time that we charge staff again to think about how we put forward a plan to deal with the financial challenges that this city has. All of that work and much more is where we come to today. And as I begin my presentation, I want to commend and talk about the foundation that Enid provides to all of this work. I don't do this because she's sitting 12 feet away from me, and I don't want her to ask me to do 6 more of these on an annual basis. No, not at all. I do this because I, in my public service, have become very attuned to the fact that whenever there's this coalition and coalescing around moving in a certain direction, we are almost always tethered to really brilliant people that set the foundation for why this is not only work that needs to be done, it has to be done. I had the pleasure in the early 2000s of working with the likes of Fraser Mustard, of Clyde Hertzman, of Charles Pascal, all of whom we've lost over the years, on early years. And let me tell you, full day of learning for 4- and 5-year-olds, the expansion of early child development, the work that's happening towards a more equitable model of childcare across our country has its roots in work that Fraser Mustard did. And to sit alongside Fraser and listen to that which was yelling stuff into the wind that nobody was listening to at the time, and now watching the way childcare is embedded in our public policy discussions is pretty impressive. So those words on the screen right there are the words that ground us in why we're doing this work. So Enid, thank you for being there for so many years and for being that foundation that I know, and before Joe too, but Joe and Peter and Chris and I are all indebted to you and your team for this work, and it helps move us forward. Final thing I'll say as an introduction is a little bit about the title, because everyone went, that's an interesting title. No, tonight I'm not going to announce the details of the New Deal. 2 reasons for that. One is we're not there yet. The second more important reason is if I did that in the absence of the mayor, this would be the address of the former city manager of the City of Toronto, which would be a new high watermark for this event. So if you came this evening expecting to hear all of the great details, that's not it. The point of the title is something that I've used in my leadership going back to my early days in the nonprofit. We had a group of people who led our early learning and childcare team at Wesley Urban Ministries in Hamilton. 2.5 FTEs and an annual budget of $70,000. A small and mighty powerhouse, who came to me one day because the province, across every riding in the province of Ontario, 103 at the time, was asking for proposals for someone to lead early learning in each provincial riding, one entity. And they said, we think we should apply. And I listened to why. And a lot of it was that we know they're going to say no to us, we're too small, we're not known, blah, blah, blah. But we want to protect our little program in North Hamilton. So we think by applying, they may hope that we can continue with whoever they do choose to run the rest of the riding. And I listened to their passion, I listened to why they wanted to apply, and I said at the end, have you thought for a second about what if they say yes? I hadn't thought about that. I said, are we ready? Ooh, not so sure, Paul. So while we wrote an application, which is half creative writing and half technical expertise, right? We built the infrastructure to be ready. They said yes. Our budget increased by tenfold. Our staff increased to 50 just on the early learning front, and we were delivering service in a way we never thought possible. I have since every moment forward said, what if people say yes? As one of the critical questions we need to be asking ourselves. And tonight's discussion, or this afternoon's discussion, is all going to be about those conditions that we can put in place so that when somebody says yes, we're not simply there to say hallelujah. We're there to say, great, now let's get down to work and deliver. And we've talked in Toronto a little bit about this being called the perfect storm of things that are going on right now. And I don't mean that in the kind of injury and destruction that can happen in a storm, because I don't want to head down that very dark path. It is more this sense that sometimes when you get this confluence of stormy activity, which is in itself challenging and can be very harmful in some ways, that there is this moment where we can also see something new. And I believe that's why the moment is now that we've been given to have a conversation that we've been wanting to have for quite some time. And it's how I believe we're going to be successful. And if we come at this with an understanding that we're in a perfect moment in time, and the second piece is we're doing our due diligence to be ready for when people say yes, I think we're going to be incredibly successful. And what's really exciting is that this isn't just something that a few of us in leadership at the City of Toronto on the staff side have been working on. This has been this shared responsibility and shared coming together of our council and staff to make this happen. Our budget chief, Councillor Carroll, is here this evening. The courage of Toronto Council, and I'm going to talk just a little bit about some of that courage along the way, to not just say we need help, but to say, and these are the ways we're going to demonstrate us doing our part, cannot be lost in this conversation. And so please listen for those moments along the way, because too often this is seen as the presentation staff made or something else, or the city manager giving a speech tonight. It's not. I am simply the front person for a much larger coalition of work. Our objective of a New Deal for Toronto, and not necessarily the New Deal working group, just in general, our discussions for a long period of time about this New Deal, is that we need this long-term sustainability of our finances. And that's the crisp answer for why do you want a New Deal? But there's much more to it. This will allow us to do the types of things that we need to as Toronto, not only for those who live, work, play, and learn in this community, but for those who benefit from Canada's largest city. And I don't say that with an ego to it. Believe me, my friends and family in Hamilton won't let me say that. I say it because it is what Toronto is. It's what drew me to this community. It's what gets me up every day, is that Toronto is more than just what happens within its boundaries. It has that larger impact, And it's part of the value proposition, if you like, but to me, more of the values that are behind a new deal for the City of Toronto. You've all seen this number, hopefully by now. If you haven't, then our communications department is not doing their job, and I'll be on them tomorrow. You've heard the size and scope of the issue. Toronto's challenge financially is not just one that exists in the concept of every year is our worst budget year. You hear that, right? Every year. It's every year is our worst budget year. There's something much more profound that's going on in Toronto. This is not a one-year hit. This is not a, let's just make a few adjustments one time, maybe draw on a few reserves, maybe shift a few things here and there, and in a couple of years, it will all be back into a normal course of behavior for us financially. It's not. We have a structural challenge that isn't just about an accounting problem. It's about a service delivery, a growth, an economic activity argument that we will be impeded by if we don't get this right. It's on the operating side in our day-to-day business. It's on the capital side in ways that scare me, quite frankly. Our CFO has this wonderful line, if the operating side of the house is a problem, the capital side of the house keeps me up at night. Because it is the capital which drives the service. We won't be able to do the types of things that we want to do from an operations perspective if we can't invest in the infrastructure that this city needs. And again, this isn't about a bunch of nice to haves that we could eliminate in the next discussion about our budget and make it work. These are must-haves within our system. We also have a problem that some of this hits us right away. I would love this to be a problem that we can start addressing in 2027 and move through for a decade after that. But January 1st, 2024, and our budget process in January and February of 2024 is upon us like that, and we must address some of this, particularly on the operating side, almost immediately. While capital does get spread over 10 years, we have repeatedly had to make tough decisions that are hurting our city in order to balance off what is this gigantic 30 billion nearly unfunded problem that we have. And if we go back to the perfect storm of some of that has been happening for a few years, so why now? Well, here's a few things that have pushed us to this potential for a new result. And some of it is the time we're in, some of it is the technical reality that we've built, and then some of it is our approach to being an organization that is ready and willing for people to say yes. The first condition is a series of financial pieces, and Enid said it best in the beginning when she rhymed off some of the challenges we have. How long have you been talking about some of these? A long time. So it's not as though some of the issues around who does what haven't plagued municipalities for a while. It isn't as though we haven't had infrastructure deficits. Day one, I don't think I made it to lunchtime on my first day working for a municipality before I had heard the term infrastructure deficit. And it doesn't matter whether you are in a small municipality or the largest city in Canada, it's there and it's real. So some of this stuff exists. And what's worse is not much has changed. Yes, City of Toronto Act freed up a few things, but not much has changed in terms of how we can address it. And so when we look at all of these pieces that fit together, what has changed is where we are in this particular time, 2023 heading into 2024, and probably 2025 before we start to see any relief at all. 2021, what were interest rates at? Trivia time. Lowest point they ever were at, what was it? 0.25. What are they at today? 2023, 2 years later, over 5. So just think about that piece alone. Inflation. That compounding on all the things that we normally had created a very different dynamic. And it did not change over long periods of time. It changed dramatically. And then as we've come out of the pandemic, we are out of the crisis mode of the pandemic. We are learning as a community how to live with COVID-19. But what hasn't left us is some of the impacts of that period of time where the world changed. The impacts that it's had on the way we work. The impacts that it's had on some of the social issues that confront our communities. They again, I started my work right out of McMaster University, outreach work in homelessness in the early 90s. Encampments are not new. Shelter pressures are not new. But I can tell you, I've never seen anything like what I see today in communities. And I have firsthand knowledge of this work and have had for 20 years. So when we think about what's changing, it is not that these things individually are all that unique, but it's the fact that they're all happening at the same time. And so that creates a dynamic where we need something to change because every single one of those pieces is in play. And so I watched, there were a bunch of football players that they were doing these, human interest things during the football game the other night. And they showed these 3 football players, and I forget the team, and they could all solve the Rubik's Cube in less than a minute. I say our challenge is like having a Rubik's Cube in multiple dimensions, where if you solve one, you solve the next. The other one you just solved then becomes scrambled again. You can't ever figure out a way to solve the Rubik's Cube, let alone do it in less than a minute. And that's the situation we're in. The second piece, though, that gives us a bit more hope is that right now we're in a position where the alignment of the social, economic, and health-related priorities are shared, and they rely on a stable Toronto. So part of the argument that we've used and the discussion that we've had is that there is a very key role for Toronto to play if we want to advance some of the other goals that we have broadly as Ontarians and Canadians. And our role is significant. Again, you can say maybe that's big and egotistical, but let's talk for a minute about some of the things that are on this slide. Much has been made of the pie charts, which were there for a purpose. Toronto contributes a significant amount to Ontario and Canada's GDP. There's no question about that. Any city of 3 million people in a country of our population would have that effect, and Toronto does. And we showed the direct investment as a share of budgets for the province and the federal government. They don't like this slide all that much because they're quick to point out that Torontonians do benefit, for instance, from the education system, from the healthcare system, that we drive on provincial roads and we connect through provincially funded transit systems, and it's all true. The challenge is, though, I can't leverage that from a financial perspective. I can't borrow to balance our operating budget on the healthcare system. We can't find a way to fund the operations of our shelters through working on the other provincial programs. So the direct investment share is important because ultimately that's how we end up being able to deliver the services at the City of Toronto. But I move you to the left side in the bottom portion of that. Here's where there are all sorts of reasons why the role that major cities play, and Toronto in particular plays, are really important at this particular moment. Whenever I have discussions, and we as a city have discussions with other orders of government, particularly the federal government, around targets around immigration, around the reality of what's happening with the forced displacement of people around the world, the answer is all the numbers are going up. And in many ways, that's okay, because as a country, we need that immigration to drive our economy. The challenge is, for all I hear about what's going on with people going to the East Coast and going to the North and whatever else, when you actually look at the solid numbers, the vast majority are coming to this area. So we can talk all we want about what's happening in other jurisdictions, but if we ignore what's happening in Toronto, the challenge becomes too large. And when we think about how we're going to provide housing, how we're going to provide basic services, and right now, how we're even going to welcome those who have been forcibly displaced from their countries and are coming to this country through Toronto, we can't figure out a quick path through that. That's not because we don't have the wherewithal, we don't have the partnerships. It's because we don't have that shared commitment to making it work. We could have a much larger system that would welcome those seeking asylum, as well as those coming through various immigration processes to this area, for sure. The challenge is we're going to need that partnership to make it work. Think about our capital program, which it sits at $50 billion in planned capital activities that are funded. Add on to that another $30 billion, you're talking about $5 to $8 billion a year in investment. The jobs, the purchasing that comes from the capital program at the City of Toronto is significant. So when we talk about investments in capital, again, not only are the capital investments driving growth and driving all sorts of those good things, they're driving an economy that we need at this particular moment. And we host a whole bunch of things and we do some things where it's like, let's talk about how this city can function well to maintain that commitment we have to the economy and the growth of this place. I've been told that I'm getting old. This slide is to make sure that I remind you I'm not that old. This is Taylor Swift. For me, I find her a minor annoyance whenever I watch the Kansas City Chiefs play football. For many other people, she's considered not only one of the greatest entertainers of our time, but also one of the smartest business people of our time. We are really thrilled to death that she is going to be here for 6 concerts, I understand, in 2024. Our CFO has a dad joke that he tells, and so I'll share it here because I promised him I would. We need a Taylor tax, and we need it swiftly. You can use that one for free, but the groans that you will receive regularly, particularly from anybody under the age of 30, maybe cause you not to use it too much. But again, as we all know in this room, and we need to continue to talk about, one of the other challenges as we move forward as a community is there must be a conversation about how we are funded to do the things we do. Because a lot of the things that make cities great places, and certainly world cities like Toronto a great place, is the fact that we do have this coming. We do have the FIFA World Cup men's finals coming in 2026. They come to places like Toronto. And we receive a little bit of revenue from the municipal accommodation tax because I hear that the hotels are already all sold out. But the merchandising, the increased activity that happens from employment and local businesses, whether it's for the Jays, the Raptors, the Leafs, TFC, I cannot talk about the Argos, but all those teams that we have here in Toronto, the entertainment value, the cultural connections that we have, all of those festivals which are roaring back to life. The vast majority of that revenue and that economic activity is not coming to the City of Toronto. I don't begrudge that it happens, and I'm sure as heck not sending you out to say, hey, Toronto really doesn't want any of this anymore. We do. But how are we going to talk about a more fair share of that work and a more fair share of some of what that brings to us? So alongside the very crispy pieces of municipal, provincial, and federal connections is this larger discussion about how we're funded. Because if I go back to the beginning slide, the second slide, and some of the great words and quotes from Enid along the way, when you look at cities of our size and scope around the world, there is a more balanced revenue source. What do we come after repeatedly? Property, whether it's commercial or whether it's residential, and we do it a lot of different ways. We'd love for that to be spread in some different ways as well. The other piece is that in Toronto, we are contributing significant portions, as all municipalities are, to services that really have a better lifespan and a better life place within a income tax base rather than a property tax base. And whether it's in housing, social services, or health services, I don't think anybody wants the City of Toronto to start to pull back on those commitments and those investments, because this place will not be the kind of place that anybody wants to live in and grow up in if we don't figure out a way to have a better distribution of who's paying for those costs. Because as we know, some of these services, the property tax base is not the home for them. If we drill in on transit, we love the fact that our transit system is for more than just Torontonians. And 13% of our trips start or end outside of the city of Toronto. And that's fantastic because this city just doesn't work if it's not seen in a more regional context. But that subsidy is $150+ million on an annual basis. And again, those are the pieces that hold us back from doing some of the things we need to do as we advance Toronto's priorities. Not because we begrudge this, not because we want to put some kind of barrier up. In fact, we'd love to have fewer barriers. Fair integration, the work that's happening in terms of regional transit and transportation is a must. And I'd argue the regional approach needs to extend to housing and some other types of social programs as well. But the reality is right now the system is set up to penalize in some ways Toronto's ability to fund other programs because we need to subsidize some of this work. The shelter system is an acute example right now of where there is a true need for there to be some kind of a different deal in Toronto. When I was in Hamilton, I was responsible for the shelter system. I at one time ran one of the shelters, but I was responsible for the shelter system that fluctuated between 450 and 500 beds. And Hamilton's a city of 550,000 people. So even if we round the population of Hamilton down and go with a even number, Toronto is 6 times larger. So do the math. At our highest point, that would mean there'd be about 3,000 shelter beds in Toronto. When I researched for the job opportunity in Toronto, I found out that the base system was 6,400 beds. Today, it is nearly 11,000. It is a larger system because of the regional nature, because of what happens in terms of where people come from a refugee and asylum seeking perspective, and always have. The numbers right now are double what they used to be. But even in 2017, 2,500 people who were seeking asylum each night were in our shelter system. So this is, again, not a new issue, but it's an emerging and growing issue. But to suggest that our shelter system is the same is just not true. When we look at the per capita rates, Toronto's is much higher. And some of that is the reality of who we are and where we are and the draw we have. And it needs to be recognized as we move forward. So that's all the reasons why we feel people need to explore a new deal. But what if they say yes? Some of the very interesting discussions that we had during the long-term financial plan work was what's the level of our share and our work that we need to do as the City of Toronto to demonstrate that this is just not an exercise in helping to fill a hole and make our budget process a little easier. The budget chief will have fewer sleepless nights and all the rest. It's not just about that. This is a shared responsibility to fix some structural wrongs here in the City of Toronto. And so we presented very clearly to Toronto City Council back in August that our recommendations were simply not an intergovernmental strategy to browbeat them to come to the table. That in fact, fully 40% of the challenge that we're facing was going to be part of what we do. The 10% is really what the public service do each and every day. We look very closely at how we deliver services and in what ways we do all of the good work of continuous improvement, and we build on some of that in order to find ways of delivering efficient and effective programs, and in that doing so, reduce the pressure year over year that comes forward. And then we came with a big ask. We said to Council, there are things we need to do within the City of Toronto. Not many of them were big winners from a political perspective. Talking about tax rates over the next 3 years that we can kind of lock in so we can plan and create a transition strategy instead of waiting each year and seeing and determining it on a year-by-year basis. Looking at some of the taxes that were already in place and increasing those. Examples of that is the increase to the vacant home tax, increasing the land transfer tax on luxury homes, adding some revenue pieces, which were not big winners, a commercial parking levy, looking at a 911 charge so that we can pay the costs of the next-gen 911 work and ensure that we can have a solid system of 911 within the city. But we know that while we're charging that to the providers, and we have the ability to do that in Toronto, do you think for a minute that's going to simply come out of their costs? No, it'll be passed on. We know that. We took this package to council, and there were some deep breaths, I think you would agree. There were some deputations of people in the community who said, what do you mean? You're going to come after yet more taxes or fees or things on our property? But you know what? At the end of the day, council stood up and said, yes, we have to do these things. We have to demonstrate that we are not going cap in hand, that we are going as partners. Because that's how you leverage the reality that even with all of that work, 60% remains a challenge that we need help with. The other piece that became very evident in our early conversations, particularly with the province, is that we needed to continue to demonstrate and communicate that when it comes to the fundamentals, we can be trusted to do it and get it right. It goes back to my story at the beginning about our little fledgling early learning programs. So if somebody says, hey, we're going to go and work with you differently on building housing and getting transit done, and we turn around and say, geez, we don't really know how to do that, we're not going to get very far, and we're going to lose the credibility. And you know what? We've been able to say very convincingly that we do some of these things well, and we will continue to do them well. I'm a little tired of saying nothing can ever get built in Toronto, because I look at this and I say, well, the fact we have more cranes in the air, they're not all City of Toronto projects. So things can get built in Toronto, and they are getting built at a level that is unparalleled across North America. But we've also done things to look at how we can ensure that some of the delays and some of the process that does take too long can be rectified. We get a whole range of things needs to happen to deal with housing. We've heard the calls from the community to say, you're losing housing that's affordable in numbers that is making whatever you'll build not very effective. So we've started an acquisition fund. And I've heard the criticism that it's not enough, but we're out of the gate with it. We are encouraging philanthropic sources. We're encouraging government sources to say, build this fund with us so that good organizations in the community can go and purchase buildings and keep them in the affordable range. And it's working already. Our first series of grants oversubscribed. We would have liked to approve more. We approved right to the limit, and people are out today acquiring properties so that they can maintain them as affordable units. We have an aggressive housing strategy that was just approved at Executive Committee yesterday. I lose track of time sometimes, but yesterday. No longer 40,000 as a target, but 65,000. And doing some different things. Holding on to things publicly so that those rents don't jump the minute somebody leaves that place. If you talk to Toronto Community Housing, and you may know that we've hired Jag Sharma, who is the CEO of Toronto Community Housing, as one of our deputy city managers. And we talked about the fact that at Toronto Community Housing, when somebody leaves, even in a market unit, and let's just say it's $1,000 a month, Toronto Community Housing doesn't put it back on the market at $2,700 a month. Some of what you see in other parts of the community. As Jag says, boy, I'd just like to raise it maybe 20, 25 bucks so we could do a little bit better on our bottom line, but the answer is they don't. So there's that ability when it is publicly owned and operated that we can do different things with keeping that affordability. And the other piece is we are going to look at how do we increase the amount of rent geared to income units. And I understand that that's about a subsidy. There is no pathway to figure out how you do rent geared to income units without a subsidy. But it's time we started to talk about that, because for folks that may be earning $15,000 to $16,000 a year, whether that's through government transfer or whether that's through employment, and paying $400 a month, the reality is you have to subsidize that to happen. But think about the difference that that's going to make in the person's life. And it's what we need to continue to start to do. We are looking at ways that we can utilize our land differently, and our Housing Now approach has partnered with the private sector to build high-density pieces, and we're in the ground with some of those. Couldn't have launched the program at a worse time through the middle of the pandemic, but we're there. Shovels, ground broken, hundreds of units coming on board with about a 25 to 30% affordability piece within them, much larger than we're seeing in some of the other projects that are happening in the City of Toronto. So across this spectrum, We're doing our part. We're committing to the housing targets of the province, and we're going to exceed them. Already this year, we've exceeded our target in housing starts. And as we all know in municipalities, we've approved way more. But the starts are above the provincial target already sitting here in November of this year. We're doing things like responding to the community. There is a little hubbub in Toronto about, hey, we need to open park washrooms and fountains a little bit earlier. Interestingly, for 12 years, the standard of when we opened the washrooms and fountains was just fine. But then what happened? People, I'm not going to say they were reintroduced. They reimagined their relationship with open space through the pandemic. And suddenly the demand was, we'd like it to be 12 months of the year. We understand that might take a bit of time to winterize all this stuff, but can we open it as soon as possible? And we do now. The reality is, in a frost-laden country like ours, you can't get it open by April 1st, but we're getting them open by mid to late May, which is a full month earlier, and people are able to experience it. We're demonstrating that we have the capacity to do that type of continuous improvement and move through. We're working on partnerships. You know, the WNBA court here, the first of its kind, is not a story about a basketball court, which would make sense for me to share. It actually has nothing to do with the court, as cool as that is. You know what else happened? Is to build that court and to bring that court to fruition, a new youth advisory group was formed out of a Toronto community housing project in the city, and it is the legacy piece of this work. Yes, we have a fantastic court. Yes, we have the first of its kind in Canada. Yes, I hope the next WNBA star comes out of that area just by Leslieville. But the reality is it wasn't about that. It was about leveraging that for engagement with young people. Those are the types of things we're doing. We're finding ways to make permanent the stuff we did in the pandemic. We're finding ways to work with traffic. And this is the analog version, more traffic wardens and all the rest. But you need to know behind the scenes, we are working with the very best technology we can to try and figure out a way that we can move people around this city in as most effective and efficient way we can, in a digital way, in an AI way, in any way possible. And I couldn't help but reminding people that through this all, our public health work is continuing to deliver the services we need as we live with COVID-19. Alongside delivering good basic services and being confident that we can do the things that we would do together differently with other orders of government, we need to communicate, is my point on this slide, communicate more effectively how innovative and how committed to continuous improvement we are as municipalities. I've worked in 2 municipalities. I talk to my colleagues all the time. Ours is not a problem of a culture of continuous improvement and innovation. Ours is a challenge of communicating that to the broader public. And in Toronto, there's a couple of pieces. There's a lot on this slide, and many of you, would understand and know and probably are doing energy from waste type of work. We have landfills. The reality is we've got to have landfills, and we're trying to find ways of doing that. But here's what's different about this. This has pluses on the financial side. It's going to either save us some cost if we use this energy ourselves. It's going to provide us with a possible small revenue stream, so that is a good tick. We are trying to do our part to capture, and move on that climate continuum. And I understand this is not the end-all be-all of a net zero approach, but trying to find the best ways to work along that journey towards net zero. But you know what's the coolest thing about this project? When they came and gave me a briefing on this, is we have 3 additional equity partners in this project. And they are the 3 First Nations communities that the land at which we are on with this landfill. They are not partners. They are not part of a community advisory committee. They are not part of that. They are equity partners in this project. You've heard a lot in the last little bit about our work around a new community-based approach to mental health calls. And again, the concept is not a new one. It's happening all over all over North America, and many communities are coming on board. We are taking the next step within the next year to expand this so there's 100% coverage across the city of Toronto after a very successful pilot within about 60% of the city. And all of these stats are amazing points of how this can really work well. But I also want to share with you the thinking behind it, that to me is more about the how we're doing it and what we need to communicate. This project and program and approach from its very beginning was never about police bad, community-based service good. It was never about ripping stuff away from them and placing it with someone else. It was a shared movement towards a better way of supporting people in need in this community. It started with embedding mental health workers within dispatch long before we ever had a Toronto crisis response program. To listen to the calls, to understand the calls, and to start to think about the very practical realities of the liability and the work that has to happen in triaging these really difficult situations. We worked with police to understand what that tolerance would look like, what their experience was in some of the calls that, quite frankly, can turn violent and are not appropriate for community-based responses. They did not rebuff those advances, they welcomed them. When we started to work at the diversion, not only was dispatch getting better and better and continues to get better and better each day, but on the ground, the officers that are working in communities are more and more calling for this service and not having to wait for a dispatch response. We're a long way from perfection. We still have lots of work to do with how we're going to balance where calls are best placed in this community from a response perspective. But what I found very innovative about this is it's real easy to go in and say, we're here to take your work away because we're better at doing it than you are. That's one way. The other way is to say, how can we work together, because our shared goal is to have the right people interacting with the right situation in this community each and every time. And that's what we're working towards. The last thing I'll say as I wrap up today is that we need to lead, obviously, from a place of data and evidence. And then we need to embrace and build the voices that can help communicate why this is so critically important. And here is a slide that shows some of the ripped from the headline pieces. And very interesting. I know there were a lot of people just waiting to see how this would land. Would it land as, the whining of Toronto now heard around the world? Would it land as a thud of, yeah, what else is new? Never going to happen. Or would it land as a real discussion starter around what's possible to help us get to where we need to be? You've seen the political reaction. I was asked when we launched the long-term financial plan, I was asked by the media, well, they keep saying no, so what suggests, it was great, for the title for today. They've said no, 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 no. What makes you think after today they'll say yes? And I came back to, the evidence is sound. We're not asking people to take care of this for us. This is what is going to help Toronto be the thing that it needs to be in the province and the country. So I think that at any moment when you bring all this information, you give that opportunity to say yes. And then we had business organizations and others. Peter was involved in writing an opinion piece, and Board of Trade connected with that, and others have come to the table to say, we may not like all of this stuff that we're hearing, particularly some of these new taxes or fees or levies, but we understand what has to happen. I spoke at the real estate board, people that are encouraging people to sell and buy houses in the very same time they saw the list of things we're going to do to residential properties in Toronto. And you know what their comment was? How can we help? How can we help you make the case in an even stronger way? And tonight, the mayor herself is hosting an event where we're having that same conversation. Later this month, when we launch our budget consultations, it will be that same conversation. You don't have to agree with everything we're saying, but can we agree on the principles that would allow our community as a whole to come forward and share those thoughts together? And the answer we hear over and over again is, now we're starting to get it. We thought it was just this, usual dance between levels of government. You don't give us enough and we deserve it. No, this is really about that shared set of things together. So in closing, the story that I've shared today is a story of Toronto because I'm the city manager here in Toronto, but it's not. It's the stories of cities across this country because we are all facing at some level these types of financial challenges. We all are leading creative ways to deal with the things that confront us as communities. The size and scope and scale and its relativity to some of the national things that are going on may be different, but the core fundamentals are the same. And that is, I think, where this goes, is my hope. That whatever is happening with Toronto right now, the province willingly sitting down with us, now the federal government saying, hey, we want to be a part of this too, that whatever this leads to for the City of Toronto and our provincial and federal partners is simply that first step to talk about what we need to do to have stronger cities, which is better for our community, it's better for our province, it's better for our country. Thanks for listening.
Now we get a chance to ask Paul some questions, and I've been asked to kick it off. But what I'd like you all to do is we'll have a few minutes where we'll open it up to the audience. So if you wanted to start thinking about what questions you want to have, I'll be to you in a few minutes. But first, can you just, I think he's got the communication thing down pat. Wouldn't you agree? You notice there was no teleprompter there either, right? That's pretty cool.
That's how we're saving a bit of money at the city. I told them they don't need a teleprompter anymore.
Yeah. So, Paul, the $46.5 billion, not that anyone's counting, it's a deep hole. And I like the way you broke out sort of 40% from within, 30 and 30 from elsewhere. I wonder if we could just start with, if you could just explain a little further, what are some of the hot spots that you're working on? What are the things that are really keeping your treasurer up at night that you're kind of focusing on as we head into the budget season?
So certainly on the operating side, it really does boil down to almost a couple of categories. The first is transit. The pressure in our transit system from an operations perspective is incredible. It's at a level that there is no hope we can deal with this in an internal basis. The pressure's somewhere between 500 and 600 million, depending on what kind of service level we want to achieve at the end of the day. And remember, this is not about increased service, right? This is about keeping that transit system, buses, subways, LRTs going in the way they are today. And the big piece of that comes out of this change that I've talked about in the post-pandemic work world. What's interesting as you dig into the numbers is that most of the transit categories are at or above their pre-pandemic levels. People using it on weekend, off the chart. We're at 156% of pre-pandemic levels. People are out and about, it's great. Those that use it 1 or 2 days a week, I think it's about 89 or 91%. Not so bad, and I think that'll easily top out near 100% soon. Commuters, those who use it 4 or 5 times a week pre-pandemic, 56% of the pre-pandemic level. Where is that most acute? On our subway system, one of the more expensive parts of our operation. So we've got this interesting dynamic. Our buses are full, and we need to do stuff on buses, as any of you who travel by bus understand. Our subway system needs some of that injection. And so again, we're not talking about, and when I say it to people who say, well, it's a transit, you got to figure that out. I say, you tell me who in 2019 or right up to 2020 was saying at all to the city, you better plan for the day when your ridership, commuter ridership is 50% of what it is right now. Point me to the article, point me to the deputation, it's all online, and then I'll say, okay, oopsie, we did this to ourselves, we need to figure it out. Nobody could have predicted that within that short period of time work would change. Now, might it change back? Maybe, we'll see. The second big area is our shelter system. And part of that is our transition from saving lives and protecting health. We had to expand our shelter system dramatically in very short periods of time during the pandemic. We're now having to right-size that approach and bring it back to the more manageable system, and at the same time deal with the crush of people. And again, we're not manufacturing homelessness. I don't wear this as a badge of honor that we're now at 10,900 shelter spaces across the system. We want to find a way to lower that. We have a plan that would actually lower the costs. Right now, our hotel shelters cost double what our owned shelter system would cost. So we need to get into more building so we can run it that way. But that pressure is about $400 million. And that's before we factor in if asylum seekers stay at the same level. So those are two huge areas. And then layer onto it a bit of the housing issues that we've got. And you can see pretty closely that we've got $1 billion problem right out of the gate for 2 service areas alone. And, so people say, is this just a conglomeration of everything that we do and we're adding it all up and hoping for a new deal? The answer is no. We're getting real specific in a couple of areas because those are the areas. And quickly on the capital side, again, half of that $30 billion pressure is in transit. We have a challenge right now. We need new subway cars. And it's holding us back because the old subway cars, we can't use the automated systems which would allow us to run better headways, would allow us to move people in better ways. We need to upgrade the whole system. And then we have this new challenge, which is when we committed Ontario Line, Eglinton Crosstown, Finch West LRT, it was a very different dynamic. And so those operating costs are going to be a challenge for us moving forward. And so we're asking for a chance to talk about how we maintain a world-class transit system that drives an economy that we need to keep moving in a different way. We're not asking for a total nationalization or provincialization of our transit system. We're asking for a different type of partnership. And just to put it in context, today, the subsidy from the City of Toronto to the TTC is $1.3 billion. So to suggest that we're not doing our part for transit in Toronto is false. And that's why these increased pressures at a level they are simply unsustainable.
Now, I guess the other side is not what we want from them, but you've talked a lot about how Toronto had to come to the table making a commitment to address that 40%. And I guess from a point of view of the public, or where do you think that's going to be heading in terms of either the things that get deferred, the things that get, to your credit, you said a lot about how we would do things that would be doing better, because there were a lot of really innovative things that you referred to, which I think are kind of exciting no matter what context they're in. But are there areas where we're either going to see taxes going up or services being pressured?
Yeah, I mean, the commitment is there already from council for certain taxes to go up. They've approved that. We said we needed some things to kick in right away, and council, to their credit, said we agree and let's go. There are some other things that are coming back for reports because it's going to take us some time to understand how to implement the commercial parking levy and things like that. I think the conversation, though, is very interesting. So obviously, I can't go into the details of what's being discussed, and I know you're not asking that in particular. Yeah. But it is really interesting. The words you hear from Premier Ford, from Mayor Chow, they're real. That there's these shared areas, and particularly around housing. And I think a lot of the conversation is going to be about how can we unlock a shared commitment to doing the housing. And this is one of those weird moments where sometimes you get agendas and it's like our top 5 things don't look anything like your top 5 things and don't look anything like your top 5 things. And then municipalities aren't even on the same page about what their top 5 things are. We don't have a lot of that right now. There are very few levels of government and very few of my colleague municipalities where our top 5, if they weren't identical, they're 4 out of 5. And that's the moment that we have. So what we are saying is those are the areas we don't want to pull back on. So how can you help us continue to move? I think transit expansion is a really good idea. So does the province, so do Torontonians. They want it to function though. And I'll be honest that if there isn't a path forward, you've heard it from the head of our TTC. It's not going to be, you might see a 6-minute headway instead of a 3-minute headway. It will be that things will not operate. And I don't want, I've tried not to scaremonger much around this. I think the one area that I do really have a lot of fear around is if there isn't a realization on what we need in transit, there isn't a lot you can do to just kind of pull back in transit because of the safety issues and because of the overall cost it is. So I would hate to see that happen, and that's, I think, why we're focused on a few key areas that have impact.
Now, one thing you've been very generous about tonight is like saying that a big part of the ability to bring things forward has been because council's been prepared to follow along. And I know when we were working together on the long-term financial plan, one of our biggest anxieties was that we'd relive the same challenges that Peter Wallace experienced when he brought forward a really good report and it couldn't get out of executive committee. What do you think is different this time that has helped council hear it and has helped council be able to show that kind of leadership? Because nobody wants bad news. Everybody wishes it would be fine. What do you think has been the secret sauce for getting it forward this time?
I mean, to be honest, a lot of it was the rhythm of what we talked about this evening is that, with the right information in the right time, I think people's heads are in just different spaces. It's really hard not to understand the slight difference that's been here. So let's be honest, there were budgets previous, while there were some structural challenges that were very evident, our budget process worked. Our opening pressure was $500 to $600 million. We worked a bit as staff. Council decided on an appropriate tax rate. We did a few things with fees, and we got to a balanced budget. That stopped happening last year, and now having to use the backstop of the $1.1 billion. So I think it's a realization that there isn't a path to balance, which is always the trick, is right now that we're there, it's saying there isn't a path to balance, so you can't even push this back 1 year. And then I think people have also realized as we've come out of the crisis point of the pandemic that there are some fundamental things that have changed in our community. Because the other piece to add on to this, and why I have had some sleepless nights, is in the midst of this, we have a change of mayor. So the long-term financial plan gets commissioned in the final stages of the last term of council under Mayor Tory. Very supportive of the work, as were many, many councillors. And then we have this change of mayor. And the ironies of ironies, just a little insight here. The due date for our long-term financial plan report to council, to clerks, was election day. So we're sitting there going, here's the report. And I'm in the war room in elections headquarters going, don't know who the mayor is going to be. And we very quickly had to have a new mayor have that discussion. I've got to tell you, the new mayor embraced it. There were a few things. She's like, oof, okay. Not where I might have gone and whatever else. And she's been good to find ways of doing that through what she does as the political head of our organization. But again, when she first looked at it, and I bet you, I didn't ask her this, I bet you she was very worried, as I expect any new mayor would have been. She said, there's some really solid work here about why we need to do what we need to do. Now it's just, how far are we going to go? How fast are we going to go? And how are we going to open that door for conversation? So there were a lot of things that could have unseated this. I think the environment we're in, Sabine, played a huge role in it. I don't think we needed to convince people of the time we're in. And then the other piece was, tremendous leadership on council from a number of key areas that just said to folks who were a little bit still, had some trepidation about it, they just said, you know what, it's time we got on with this, and we did.
Well, I know what you mean about change on the project team. We went through 3 city managers, 2 mayors, and 1 gender change. And I got to say, it was very convenient having all that other change, really made mine hardly noticeable at all. So it was very good.
Sabine, I could have put this up on another slide, and I want to mention it now because Sabine, during the process of us, and it was almost a year of building this long-term financial plan. It was actually a little more than a year. We had that conversation that you led, which is, you said, here's the big challenge, folks. The City of Toronto needs to figure out what level of your own commitment will meet the political bar for doing enough. Not the financial bar, which would have been easier. Not the technical bar, which would have been a piece of cake. What's that political? That question, I was upset by it originally because I'm like, now it's going to, I'm like, man, this is, ask me an easier one that we can go away and just run the numbers on. But that lengthy conversation that we had with the project team, the lengthy conversation we had with elected officials along the way, was another reason that I think we got to the right level. Now, I'll never know whether it was perfect or not, but I think what we demonstrated along the way was that Toronto was willing to take enough energy and effort to do what it needed to do, that people were willing to say, it's a little hard for us to say, stop coming with your hand out. And maybe that's why we got to yes.
Great. Now, I want to open up to anybody who has a question. We have a person who's going to come around with a microphone. We've got one in the back corner on the right-hand side. If you could just put your hand back up so they can see. And of course, usual rules. We're looking for short preambles. We're looking for a quick question, and I can be extraordinarily high-handed when required.
Sounds good. I was watching Executive Council yesterday, and the big housing announcements was really, really exciting. And as a young person on housing, my big thing is speed, because I want to live in a place really, really quickly. And I seen Mark Richardson's deputation. He was crunching the numbers, and he was telling us, like, you got a really short time if you want to hit the numbers that you want to do. And the process it's very, very long for housing with all the planning and whatnot. So what if they do say yes, and you do get the money from the federal and provincial partners? Can Toronto build at the speed it needs to do?
So we're certainly working towards that. And, I'm never going to one that's just going to give you the answer you want to hear. We have to demonstrate a different way of working in order to get there. One of the things that we did along the way, actually it matched the time frame of doing our long-term financial plan, is we restructured our organization. We have a group that's called Development and Growth, but it brings together housing, it brings together planning, it brings together our development review process people, brings together Toronto Building. They now all sit under one leadership structure, and their charge is to do two things. One is to really drive the information we need to make good decisions on housing, and the second is to make darn sure that we're doing everything in our power to speed this process along. We will have to have some tough conversations, but you know what? Before I used to joke, and it's a joke because it's a nice story, but it was true. If I ever had to really figure out what was going on with something, I had to make 7 phone calls. Then I had to stitch the story together. Then I likely had to call a meeting of at least 14 people. And you're sitting there going, this cannot be the way that you would, if we were starting from scratch, the City of Toronto suddenly created out of thin air, we would not have organized ourselves the way we were around housing, around planning, around the ways we move these things through. So I think what you're going to see is a massive improvement. We don't have a lot of time to show that improvement, and we have a lot of pressure on us to get it right. So again, one of those things that we did in the background was we didn't say that we're just going to say a lot of good things and hope that the usual system can produce the results. We've actually changed the system internally so that we can. I will say the other conversations we are having with other orders of government is help us out. There are some things that they do which slow down the process as well. They may not like to admit it as much, but we need that work as well. And I think it's really an interesting moment. A lot of you have been reading, I'm sure, about the Housing Accelerator Fund announcements, right? This new investment from the federal government. They are being very clear in the criteria for approval. And if you watch what's happening in Mississauga, and Gary, I know you must be just, as the head of Peel Region, but looking at Mississauga, where a mayor is contemplating and has said publicly is looking at using the strong mayor power to change a decision of council in order to allow resources to flow, because this is what we need to tackle. We're going to have to put density everywhere. We're going to have to test people's sensibilities. We're going to also have to balance neighborhood dynamics and all the rest. But a bit more of that is going to have to be weighted towards speed. It's what Mark was talking to us about in his deputation. And I know that a number of people on council feel the same way. So I think the moment is now for us to be looking at these, and I can tell you that we've structuralized ourselves so we have the best chance of success for it. But you can't just take my word for it. You're going to have to hold us to account. That's the way we'll prove to you that we can get it done faster.
Okay, next question.
I can't remember a time when there have been two like-minded mayors of Toronto and Montreal. Progressive mayors with a lot of ideas about the future. But I haven't seen any evidence of Toronto-Montreal connection since the election of Mayor Chow. Are you in? I think that between the two mayors, there can be a much more likely set of results from Ottawa that both cities would like to have.
So I can tell you that our mayor has connected with a number of key mayors across Canada, and the mayor of Montreal is one. I can tell you that at a city manager level, we're connected with the administration there. It's been hugely instructional in our approach and our building a different discussion with the federal government on refugees and asylum seekers, because Montreal is, again, sort of that second largest piece now. They were the first largest and now about the second largest. But the way they've handled it and the way they've worked with the federal government, we just said, hey, help us out, because you have some things in place to deal with refugees that we don't. So how do we get there? But politically, there are those conversations. And I think you're right. There are a group of cities across Canada that do meet administratively, that do meet politically, and I think we've got lots that we can learn from each other, and it's the only way we're going to advance the federal conversation, to your point. There's no way it's just going to be about Toronto federally. There might be a small piece of investment that's Toronto-centric. It's going to take that coalition of a few cities across Canada that change the dynamic federally, but thanks for that.
Question in the back?
Hi, how are you? My name is Bilal, analyst at Infrastructure Canada. Undoubtedly, Toronto requires a larger size of the financial pie to ease financial burden and achieve some sort of financial stability and sustainability. And you laid out in the presentation that Toronto itself is reshifting its own priorities and looking for additional sources of innovative revenues to ease the pie, to ease the burden, but it still requires 60% assistance from external sources. Do you ever see a scenario where Toronto would perpetually require assistance from the federal government, i.e. with rapid population expansions or urban developments for, let's say, 10 years from now? Will Toronto still require assistance, or is there a plan for eventual financial autonomy? And if there is there a timeline for when Toronto will be financially independent?
So certainly the discussion we're having with both the province and the federal government is that we need to stop this cycle. None of us want to be at this table every year, every 5 years, every whatever. It's another thing that we all agree on. Let's not see each other as often having the same conversation. So I think where we're headed is, I'm going to be very practical. In the next few months, are we going to solve that 60%? No. We're going to start to see some of that happen. If I was a betting person, I think that starts with a conversation about some different types of direct investments and some looking at some either asset classes within the infrastructure world or some specific programs where there can be added investment in a more traditional fashion. The bigger conversation we need to have is the piece that, right now wasn't the desire of the provincial government when we struck the New Deal working group, which is to talk about how we differently share the growth-related taxes, and those are sales taxes and income taxes. If you look at other major cities around the world, and I get we can have a debate about their overall tax rate and all the rest, but that aside, when you look at major cities around the world, they balance an access to property taxes, which is always that kind of municipal piece. They always have the ability to levy some fees and specific taxes in specific areas. And they almost always have either sales tax and income tax, or at least one of the two. And so the the holy grail, I think, of municipal transformation will be to push that conversation. Impossible to see happening within the next 6 months to challenge our 2024 budget pressures. But I do think that is where that continued momentum needs to be, and it's where all of us, not City of Toronto at a table on its own, but all of us need to come together and say that we're avoiding the inevitable. We can do this every year, every 2 years, every 5 years, or every 10 years, or we can actually start to have an adult conversation about cities. It's where people live, it's where people are coming, and it's where they want to be. And if we ask the people whether they are asylum seekers tonight who will be landing at Pearson and coming to our Peter Street location in search of shelter, or whether they are those who have gone through immigration streams and have planned coming to Canada, they want to be in cities. And they want to understand how they can thrive in cities. And if we don't attack that in the way that I've just mentioned, we'll just do this dance for a whole bunch of times, and we'll be fighting about it and never really getting towards strategy and planning for how we actually build the cities we want.
So I think we have time to squeeze in 2 more questions if we can keep the questions and the answers short.
It's probably more to me than you.
Hi, my name is Saad Ahmed. I'm with Tiny Toronto. My question is regarding housing equity in the suburbs, particularly Scarborough, North York, and Etobicoke. And this is regarding the garden suites. We've had a lot of attention on laneways over the last 6-7 years, but there hasn't been any resources to the other 80% of the city that has backyards and garden suites. Would you be able to comment on that?
I think in general, what we're trying to do is push out policies that are consistent across the city, and you've now seen that with our approach around multi-res and those types of things, and the fourplex approach, where we're not going to have zones where something happens here and something doesn't happen there. It is a process, and it's a piece that's going to take us a little bit of time. But again, to the previous questioner's point, we have to start to accelerate that. So I think if you can take some solace, the reality is that we have moved into certain areas now citywide that 5 years ago people said there's not a hope. In fact, 2 years ago, didn't ever get to a vote because the sense was it would fail. So I think we're going to see some movement because, again, the only way to help alleviate these challenges is to do this citywide, not simply look at the downtown area.
At the back.
Paul, we all know that the federal government is overfunded and municipalities are underfunded. So I guess the goal in the New Deal will be to get some transfers of money from the federal government to municipalities. That's always the goal, but it's always difficult. Never seems to work. So my question is, if I write a check for $1,000 to the City of Toronto, is there any way the City of Toronto can give me a receipt which I can use as a deductible expense on my federal tax payment?
I do think we have the ability to issue charitable tax receipts, although that's a specificity that I'm not sure I'm fully up to speed on. So I'd have to make sure on that. But you certainly can.
Maybe not charitable. How about business deduction?
Yeah, I mean there are ways that we do some of that. It's an interesting comment. And I'll go back to the first part of what you've said, which is I think the piece. As we all communicate, because I think, you're probably here, many of you, because you believe that there's a time to do something. You may not agree with every direction we're taking, but there's a time to do something. The communication needs to be enough of we'll think about a program for 4 years and we'll give you some here, and maybe if you yell loud enough, we'll give you a little extra here. It's time to start talking about how we would fundamentally allow cities to have more of that in their own control. And that's not an uppity comment. I think it's just a practical one of the time we waste, quite frankly, between orders of government, figuring out the programs and the criteria and the eligibility and when it flows and when it stops and, oh my goodness, it's only a year left. Are you renewing it? Aren't you renewing it? Whereas if we just looked at different shares of the overall collection of investments called taxes in this country, there is only one taxpayer. I do firmly agree with that. And so let's just talk about how we're going to use that entire resource slightly differently. I actually think we'd be more efficient and effective as at least 3 orders of government that work together. But that's where we're headed, and happy to take checks as we wrap up at the end of the day.
So,
That's my old fundraiser
so-
coming out of my nonprofit days.
So speaking of wrapping up, as we welcome you back to the stage, will you join me in thanking Paul for an amazing presentation?
Wow, that was amazing. Your number 5 in your perfect storm was you need to communicate more effectively across the city. So I think my policy prescription is to clone you and just have you out there all the time, and I think we'll be very successful. We've been talking about these issues for years, as you said, 40 years, maybe longer. It's certainly time to do something, but I agree with you that it is a perfect moment in time. The stars are aligned, and I think in answer to your question, what if they say yes, I think it is you are ready. I love listening to people who love what they do. And this has been an hour and a half of listening to somebody who has the depth of knowledge, the breadth of knowledge, and loves every day of what he does. So it's just been a pleasure having you here. Sabine, thank you. I'd forgotten about Dame Judy Dench, but I do appreciate the reminder. I was going to thank you for doing a great job of stick handling the proceedings, but that's a hockey metaphor, right? And I think I need a basketball one, so I'll work on that. So again, thank you to both of you for a really stimulating hour and a half. It's been great. We have been recording this event tonight, so it will be available on our website and on a YouTube channel in about a week from now. And I'd like to remind you that we have another event in a couple of weeks. We're on a roll here on a not very controversial topic called development charges, and we're going to have a debate on the for and against development charges on November 14th, and it'll be across the street at Massey College. So again, thanks to Paul, thanks to Sabine, and thanks to you in the audience, and please enjoy the rest of your day. Good evening.